within 20 days for primary care or behavioral health, or within 30 days for specialty care, or we're outside of a 30-minute or 60-minute drive time from where the veteran lives.
Now, earlier you went through the services that you provide and that there are certain services that you don't, but you partner with Baltimore. And now you have the CBOC. What are the chances that a Montgomery County veteran is going to need to take advantage of the Mission Act?
In terms of seeing a community care provider, there are a couple of services right now where we can't meet timeliness standards. Great example is gastroenterology. For those of us who are over 50,
I don't know anything about that.
Services like colonoscopies, there's quite a backlog, and we could leverage community providers to help provide those services to our veterans in a more timely fashion.
So if I were to go to the CBOC and say, I am having these stomach problems, I need to see a gastroenterologist, and they say, well, you know, we can provide you one at the DC Center, but you're going to have to wait for 3 months. And I say, I'm having these horrible stomach pains, nausea, I can't eat. I can't wait 3 months. Now what?
So the provider has a choice, and you have a choice as the veteran. You can, they can try to get you in to be seen by one of our providers at the medical center sooner, and we do that all of the time, particularly for somebody who has symptoms of a more serious disease. Or you could request to go to a community provider, in which case your primary care provider would put in a consult, and within 3 or 4 days you would receive a phone call to be scheduled.
So what that says to me is that a veteran in Montgomery County who wants to take advantage of the system is going to be covered by the VA no matter what, whatever their symptoms are. And if it's not at the DC hospital or at Baltimore, or you need to see a provider sooner, there is now a way, which wasn't before, to do that.
There is.
That is fantastic, and I think it's important for our veterans to know. Michael, we're running out of time. I think we could do 3 sessions on all of this. I know the interest in the county veterans community about health care. And now, right now, we're working on getting a seniors home like at Charlotte Hall. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Every show tries to bring you another look at the people who've been serving our county and country. I want to thank our special guest, Michael Heimel, for taking the time out of his busy schedule. Again, Michael's director of the Washington, D.C. VA Medical Center. I am Mike Subin, and on behalf of the Montgomery County Commission on Veterans Affairs, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thanks for watching the Council in Brief. I'm Susan Kennedy. We're here with the latest news of the Montgomery County Council. As residents continue to cope with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, council members have been working to provide support to those most vulnerable residents. During this public health emergency, Maryland landlords are prohibited from evicting tenants.
So that it's one less heartache they have to worry about when making.
But Councilmember Evan Glass said he was still hearing from residents who had lost their jobs and were worried about paying the rent. This week, a $2 million special appropriation initiated by Councilmember Glass that would provide protection for those renters has been approved by the County Council.
What this $2 million program will do is expand rental assistance programs for people who are falling through the cracks, people who might not have codified leases, people who already are having a hard time paying their monthly rent, which is probably only compounded if they've lost their job or dealing with health ailments. And there are federal programs and state programs, namely uninsurance and the COVID financial assistance. There are a number of people who aren't getting those assistance programs, and that is what this program is designed to support.
In Montgomery County, more than 40% of the residents are renters. The $2 million fund will cover emergency eviction protection and housing stabilization.
The last thing we want is people falling behind on their rent, because that will lead to more people experiencing homelessness and experiencing more economic pain. So the better we can help them at the front end, the better we'll be down the road.
The money will also be used for a short-term rental subsidy program as well as a multilingual hotline.
What we need to do is make sure that county government is able to supply and provide that information to the diverse residents we have. 4 of the 10 most diverse communities in the entire country are here in Montgomery County, and we need our government programs and services to reflect that diversity by providing information in as many languages as possible.
The newly approved funding will be administered through the county's Department of Health and Human Services. Keeping the lines of communication open with all residents has been a top priority for council members, with virtual meetings and forums happening on a regular basis.
So yes, Tom, just give your introduction.
In order to reach out to community members across the board, Council Vice President Tom Hucker has been holding virtual town hall meetings on a variety of topics.
I think this town hall is a great way to capture the student voice across our county.
The most recent discussion involved Montgomery County students, where over 100 students from 16 of the county high schools participated.
This is an especially apt time to hear from students because you all have so many powerful and creative and effective ideas.
The students talked about their experience with distance learning while schools.
And welcome to the Tuesday, May 19th, 2020. Montgomery County Council meeting. We're going to begin our meeting this morning with a tribute to Odessa Shannon, a good friend of all of ours. It was with great sadness that we learned on Sunday of the passing of Odessa Shannon, an extraordinary woman, trailblazer, advocate, and friend. Today, our county mourns an outstanding public servant who showed grace, wit, humor, and compassion. She gave so much of herself during her life, and our county will never be the same due to her unstoppable efforts. In 1992, Ms. Shannon became the first African-American woman elected to the Montgomery County Board of Elections. In fact, her campaign marked first election of an African-American woman to a policy-making political position in the entire county. She was then a special assistant to former County Executive Gilchrist and an executive director of the Human Rights Commission, where she fought for equity in education, employment, and housing. From 1995 to 2008, she served as an executive director of the county's Human Rights Commission. Ms. Shannon's public service to our county extended to countless committees, organizations, community activities, too many to name. He also served on the board of directors for many organizations, such as Montgomery Housing Partnership, Montgomery County Arts Council, and the Regional Institute of Children and Adolescents. There is no question Montgomery County and our world is a better place because of Odessa Shannon. We will miss her greatly and extend our sincere condolences to her family. Would you please join me in a moment of silence for Ms. Shannon? Thank you. Your thoughts and prayers are with her family. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements, changes to the agenda, or petitions?
Okay, there I am. Good
There you
morning, President Katz and council members. We do have some items on the revised addendum number 2. On the consent calendar, the council has added 2E, action, abandonment of a portion of Andrus Road in Bethesda. 2F, action, abandonment of a portion of Kentberry Drive in Bethesda. 2G, action, approval of appointment of special counsel to assist the office of the county attorney to represent Montgomery County, including all named defendants in Bauer et al. Versus Elrich et al., Wilmer, Cutler, Pickering, Hale, and Dorr. The council has also added item 5, action, FY 21 to 26, capital improvements program, revised reconciliation changes to FY 21. There are 2 receipts of receipt of petitions. The first one is a petition from the residents of Montgomery County and Empower Montgomery supporting full funding of the MCPS CIP. The second one is a petition from concerned residents opposing Metabrick Stables and MNCPPC development of a massive indoor writing building in Rock Creek Park. That is all, President Katz.
Thank you very much. It's my understanding, and if the technology works, that there is a video tribute to Ms. Shannon as well. Are we ready to show that at this moment?
My name is Odessa Mackenzie Shannon.
Odessa Shannon was the first African-American woman to take public office in Montgomery County. Her interest in public life started with a comment her son made to her after school one day.
I was going to say, there's no
My
sound.
history teacher put up this big Confederate flag.
Can we start it
and
over?
said,
I'm
"The South
assuming there's
shall
sound
rise
with
again."
this.
What did he mean? Well, that was my first trip to the Board of Education.
She was elected to the Montgomery County Board of Education in 1982. Later, Odessa Shannon was the first woman to hold the post of Special Assistant to a Montgomery County executive. She was also the executive director of the Montgomery County Human Rights Commission and the founder of the Human Rights Hall of Fame. Her goal was always the same, to make things better for others, especially the next generation.
Okay, now let's start.
My name is Odessa Mackenzie Shannon.
Odessa Shannon was the first African-American woman to take public office in Montgomery County. Her interest in public life started with a comment her son made to her after school one day.
My history teacher put up this big Confederate flag and said, "The South shall rise again." What did he mean? Well, that was my first trip to the Board of Education.
She was elected to the Montgomery County Board of Education in 1982. Later, Odessa Shannon was the first woman to hold the post of Special Assistant to a Montgomery County executive. She was also the executive director of the Montgomery County Human Rights Commission and the founder of the Human Rights Hall of Fame. Her goal was always the same, to make things better for others, especially the next generation.
When you start thinking about your purpose in life, if you think you found one, There's the satisfaction of knowing that you've made some tiny difference. But I did what I could do. I did what I had the experience to do and the knowledge. And so that's how I entered civil rights. And I've been in it ever since.
That the folks that stand around me represent Black history. They truly have been contributors that have shaped, for me as a young man growing up in this county.
In many instances, I've been the only Black, the only woman, and those situations are stressful. But again, they strengthen you. I felt I could face anything, and I did have to face a lot, even during that period. The history of African Americans is one of obstacles overcome, progress seen, and triumphs witnessed. And this is not the time to give up the fight. A lot of the young black people have no idea what people went through, whose shoulders they're standing on. And we want to make sure they know that, so that they can carry on the fight, because it's not over.
Well, thank you to Susan Kennedy and Mike Spingarth and the entire tech team for that video. That's really a very nice tribute to Ms. Shannon. And with that, we're going to continue our meeting. Next item that we have is a approval of the minutes which have been distributed. Unless there are any corrections, they will be approved as received. And the minutes are for April 7th, April 14th, and April 16th, 2020. And they see no hints of objection, so they are approved as received. Next item that we have is our consent calendar. We need a motion to approve it. It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Council Vice President Hucker. If there's any, hold on here. Okay, I don't see anybody that wants to speak on the topics. If you do, please let me know. I know you're not shy. It has been moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Vice President Hucker, that we approve our consent calendar. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item that we have is legislative session, day 17, and it's calls of bills for final reading. First is the expedited bill 1920, which is the Administration County Executive Office of Labor Relations established. And Councilmember Navarro, if you would like to lead that off, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we did have a work session on May 14th, and we already actually have approved the budget for this item. As you recall, there was a public hearing on May 5th. Mr. Tibbetts did testify on behalf of the county executive, and he did share with us that this bill is to improve labor relations by transferring 7 employees from human resources to the new Office of Labor Relations to support the Chief Labor Relations Officer. Although the new office would be part of the Office of the County Executive, it would be considered separate from the Office of the County Executive for purposes of budgeting and any reduction in force. The OMB estimates the bill would not have a fiscal impact on the county because the Chief Labor Relations Officer position was previously created in county law and filled in FY20. As you also recall, OLO economic impact statement stated that there's little to no impact on private organizations in the county. Once we, if we approve this particular bill, there's also Executive Regulation 2519 necessary to conform the personnel regulations to the bill. Mr. Drummer has staffed this item. I'll turn it over to him to see if he has anything else to add, and then we can proceed with voting.
Good morning, everyone. As Ms. Navarro already explained, the bill is a minor reorganization. It moves people from the Office of Human Rights, creates the new office, but you've already created the position of Chief Labor Relations Officer. This simply moves the people that did help him from the Office of Human Resources and did this work previously into the new Office of Labor Relations. When it was discussed last week, there was no request for amendments. The bill is expedited so that it would take effect when if it's signed into law immediately. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. The Chief Labor Relations Officer, Steve Sluchansky, is here, as well as Deputy Assistant Chief Administrative Officer Fariba Kassiri, if you have any further questions about this move and this bill.
With that, I'd like to move approval.
It's been moved by Council Member Navarro to approve. It's been seconded by Council Vice President Hucker. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Bob Drummer, you might want to mute. Yeah.
Let me mute. Yeah.
There you go.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Drwando?
Yes.
Mr. Drwando votes yes. Mr. Reamer? Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Albanos?
Yes.
Mr. Albanos votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes. So it carries unanimously. The next item that we have is Bill 2020, the Administration Office of the County Executive Business Advancement Team established. That too, Councilmember Navarro, would you like to lead that off?
Thank you. So this was introduced by Council President Katz at the request of the County Executive. This legislation will rename the current Business Solutions Group to the Business Advancement Team. We also had robust conversation on May 14th. We had a discussion of the new strategy for regional services centers and the need to increase assistance to local businesses in a geographically accessible way. We also spoke about the structure of the team and roles. We also heard that this approach is to better coordinate services internally, partner with organizations that can have a point of contact, single point of entry for the business community. We did discuss, of course, that we would like to see this integrated into the economic development platform, as well as track our racial equity and social justice legislation and goals and see how it aligns with this new approach. But I think overall, we believe that it is important to have a consolidated approach to business support as long as there is that connectivity with other organizations such as our Economic Development Corporation, chambers, and other groups. We also spoke at length with Ms. Tina Benjamin, who will be leading this particular new group. And I think we held, I believe, a very robust session. So with that, I think I will also turn it to Mr. Drummer if there are any additional comments.
Morning. Good morning again. Apologize for the drilling in the background, working on the balconies on our condominium. This bill, again, was discussed, as Ms. Navarro explained. Jerome Fletcher, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, and Tina Benjamin, Special Project Manager, is here to answer any further questions. Tina Benjamin will be the leader of this team, which will be part of the County Executive's Office. There were two items that were discussed. One is a technical amendment to the title, the long title. And the second one is the bill is currently not expedited. The council did discuss expediting it and making it effective upon when it's signed into law. That was something that Ms. Benjamin requested at the last session.
Hey guys, this is Tim
there were no votes taken last week because we weren't in legislative session, but now we are. So the bill in your packet shows the two amendments, both making it expedited and the technical amendment to the long title, which just is better represents what's actually happening. And that's really all I need to say. If there are more questions, I'm here.
Mr. President, I would like to move the bill as with the amendments. I do believe that having an expedited bill would be important in light of this pandemic and what we are hearing on a daily basis of how our businesses are being affected in such a significant way. I think it is critical that our county government have the structure to best respond in the most efficient way. So that would be my motion.
Second.
It was seconded by, the motion was made by Councilmember Navarro and seconded by Councilmember Reamer. I see no speakers on this. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Glass.
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Dwando.
Yes.
Mr. Dwando votes yes. Mr. Reamer.
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro.
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Albornoz.
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice.
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson.
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Hucker.
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Katz.
Yes. So the motion carries unanimously. Next, I don't know if anybody can see, there we go. I was having technical difficulties here. Next item is Bill 2120, which is the Office of Animal Services, which is under the Public Safety Committee, which is the committee that I chair. It was, just as a very reminder for the council, it was sponsored by me as the council president at the request of the county executive. We introduced it on April 14th, and we did have a public hearing on May 5th. There was a representative of, there was two people, including a representative of the executive who did support the bill. This would change the Division of Animal Services from the police department, and then it would become a new non-principal office in the executive branch called Office of Animal Services. The only we tentatively approved this during the budget, and the only suggested change was the change to an expedited bill effective date of July 1st, 2020. I'm going to ask Ms. Myhill if she has any additional information.
I do not. Thank you, Mr. President. The only thing I would say is that the bill that is attached to your packet does incorporate the expedited amendment.
Okay. Very much. I see no speakers. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Councilmember Glass. All those in, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Dwando?
Yes.
Mr. Dwando votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes. So the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The next item that we have is the expedited Bill 2220, Position Creation and Position Alteration, Director of Strategic Partnerships and Director of Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission. This is actually a joint discussion and committee, and it would be government operations and public safety. And I'm going to turn to Councilmember Navarro first, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we also had a robust conversation regarding this bill and did already take a vote on the actual position. As you recall, this particular bill is expedited. It's position creation and position alteration, strategic partnerships and criminal justice coordinating commission. This will create a non-merit appointed position of a director of strategic partnerships and eliminate the requirement that the position of director of the criminal justice coordinating commission be filled by a non-merit appointee. In other words, this is an attempt to also do a slight realignment, reorganization. As everybody recalls, we did have, I think, a very thorough conversation about what we number one thought regarding approving the position and wanted to be consistent with the continuity of services approach to the budget. But we also spoke about the fact that there are other models that have worked very well that do not necessarily need to have this particular kind of reorganization and what in essence would be a new position. So we decided to not fund that particular position, but now we are here to address the bill itself. I don't have a particular recommendation because this didn't go through committee. I know Ms. Wellens has prepared a packet with a number of possibilities that would align with the conversation, the robust conversation that we had. So I will turn it over to her, unless, Mr. President, you have something to say as chair of the Public Safety Committee, but ultimately she has developed some options for us, and then we would have to deliberate and make a decision. Thank you.
No, I thank you. I think you have said it all. And Ms. Wellens, if you would please let us know your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Good morning, council members. As Councilmember Navarro explained thoroughly and concisely the contours of the bill and also the council's prior discussion. Along the lines of the prior discussion, there is a potential amendment that is outlined in the staff report that would amend the bill. It would just amend lines 6 and 7 of the bill such that there would no longer be the creation of the new position of the Director of Strategic Partnerships. However, the changes to the CJCC Director would still be intact, those changes being that it would no longer be a non-merit position and that the duties of that director would be fulfilled by an individual designated by the Chief Administrative Officer. So I think probably the main options are to, you could vote the bill up or down as is. You could move the amendment that's outlined in the staff report in order to not create the Director of Strategic Partnerships, but still make the changes to the CJCC Director, which I think makes sense because it just kind of reflects the reality that those duties are being fulfilled by somebody designated by the CAO as opposed to a standalone full-time position. So I think those are the main options before you. I'm happy to try to answer any questions, and I believe Ms. Kassiri is here as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to Ms. Wellens. I think the staff report was very comprehensive, both in the work session and for this. I think that clarifying the existing reality, which is that this position, which is now going to be unfunded in this upcoming budget based on the action that we took last week, saving $179,000, is not being filled by this position, that there still is a CJCC, there still does need to be staffing of that, and it shouldn't be tied to a position if a position in and of itself is not necessary as determined by the executive branch. I think while we don't agree with creating a new position that is unrelated to this as part of our continuity of services budget, clarifying this change and reflecting what the current reality is, I think would be appropriate. I think it was a good suggestion. So I think with the amendment of not creating the Director of Strategic Partnerships, a position that we have effectively unfunded in this upcoming budget, but in changing the responsibility so that it reflects the current reality so that we're matching the law to the reality, I think that would be appropriate. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Ms. Wellens for putting together these particular options. So I'd like to move the amendment to the bill that would eliminate the need for a new Director of Strategic Partnerships, eliminate the requirement that the Director of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission, CJCC, be non-merit, and allow the Chief Administrative Officer to designate a Director of the Commission.
Second.
It's moved by Councilmember Navarro and seconded by Councilmember Friedson. Councilmember Giwando.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Kassiri, if you're there, I just wanted to know where the executive is on this potential amendment and as a potential solution in light of the fact that the position wouldn't be funded, even if it were to move forward?
Yeah, good morning. As far as position being unfunded, that was council's decision, and I just would hope that CJCC responsibility has been reassigned to another ACAO. But I would really request that if he can keep the position, so possibly we can come back and discuss this with the council in the future. So at this,
yeah.
I would really request.
So it sounds like you prefer just to have the position even if you can't have it funded, so then if down the line you're able to make this alignment, you'd prefer that as opposed to the amendment that's before us. That would be the executive's position.
Yes, exactly. And honestly, this is so important to county executive. And I know everybody understands this, but this position is not only going to benefit our relationship with county council, even coordinating their effort with our departments through Office of the County Executive with county council. So I will just please beg you, just now, if you can just pause and let us to come back to you in a few months. That's all I would ask at this point.
I think that's reasonable, but if the votes aren't there and the amendment does pass, how would you, I think the issue that you're seeking to solve as far as communication with council is a huge issue. And so I would encourage you, again, I think what you're proposing is reasonable, and I'd be in favor of, since the money is off the table, of allowing the position to remain vacant until the financial situation changes. But even if it doesn't go that way, I would want to know either now or very soon how you intend to address the communication issues with council, because that needs to happen regardless of what action we take today.
But absolutely, and I've heard every single council member, and I remember Ms. Navarro clearly explained that, and how she used to hear the communication and how things haven't been working. We have a plan. We'll come back to county council, but frankly, having additional resources is the key to make sure we do it at least logistically effectively, because there are some logistical things behind this whole process, and there is these communication. And this position would have been involved with both.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kassir.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm a little confused by this conversation.
Yeah.
Last week we talked at length, as has been mentioned, about the communication between the executive and the council. We talked about it in context of the broader budget and the financial aspect of this position, and ultimately the council voted, I will add, in haste, to defund that in the heat of that conversation. What does this amendment do? Because it seems to me the council has already voted that this position is not something we think is good at this time. And so it seems to me that the interest is in just voting this down, and I'm not quite sure what this amendment does. Ms. Wellens, can you explain it a little further?
Yes, Councilmember Glass. I'm happy to try to explain it further. So I apologize, a little bit of technical issues. So the amendment would change lines 6 and 7 of the bill. What lines 6 and 7 currently do is to establish a new non-merit position of the Director of Strategic Partnerships. So what the amendment would do would be to strike that. But what lines 6 and 7 also do is eliminate the current position, non-merit position of the Director of the CCJC. So and then the remainder of the bill, it makes changes solely to section 2-60 of the code, which relates to the duties and the appointment of the director of the CJCC. So, and those changes of the bill would essentially say that the position it's no longer a non-merit position that is appointed by the county executive and confirmed by the council. Instead, it is an individual designated by the CAO. So the amendment would just basically change the bill such that the bill solely relates to the CJCC director, and the bill would not address at all, one way or the other, the creation of a director of strategic partnerships. I mean, that would just be taken out of the bill. You know, it's possible that at a future date, a new bill could be introduced to create that position if that was, you know, decided to be appropriate and if that could be funded. Or as Councilmember Jawanda was stating, if you wanted to pass the bill as is, it would create the position, the new position of the non-merit position of the Director of Strategic Partnership. Just given the council's prior analysis, that position wouldn't be funded at this time.
Right.
Does that clarify?
Yes, it does. I have a follow-up to that, though. So last week, when we voted to defund this position, this amendment would then create the position without funding?
No, the amendment would align the bill with that prior vote. In other words, the amendment would say, we're not creating the position that we decided not to fund. If without the amendment, the bill would still create the position. I'm sorry.
It seems to me that, you know, if we don't want to create this, we vote down the bill rather than try to amend it to keep something. Again, I'm not quite sure what the purpose of the amendment is. If we don't want the Director of Strategic Partnerships, it would seem to me that we just vote down the bill.
Right.
Is that your assessment?
Well, that would be the assessment if that's the only thing the bill did. The issue is that the bill also alters the nature of the CJCC director, and so it's those provisions of the bill that you might consider retaining, because those are reflecting the current reality that the CJCC is not a full-time, standalone, non-merit position. So the bill with the amendment would still make those changes, you know, kind of tweaking the CJCC director, but would not create the position that you voted not to fund.
Excellent, good. I appreciate the clarification. Thank you, Ms. Welland. You know, and Ms. Kasiri, just, you know, the comment that you just made about the need for, you know, better relationships and the need for having more resources to facilitate that, I don't think that's the case anymore. I don't think that we have the luxury of throwing more resources at trying to improve communication and a working relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch. I understand where you're coming from, but 18 months into this government, there's a lot of staff, there's a lot of people, and as I noted last week, we work with you, we work with the CAO, all the ACAOs, the budget director, and so many other people, and so there's a lot of conversation. Does there need to be more? Absolutely, but given the fiscal realities and the votes, the very tough votes we took last week, I'm not sure that more resources are the answer to improving communication. And so I just wanted to state that, Ms. Wellens, I appreciate the clarification. Based on that additional information, I'll be supportive of the amendment so that we can make sure that the CJCC is up and running to the best of its ability. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Kasiri, you mentioned my name when you were discussing this issue of the lack of communication. And let me say the following. This council under my presidency worked very diligently to ensure that all of those appointments that the executive wanted, that we would put them through. As a matter of fact, we went above and beyond and approved the designation of assistant CAOs, which was something new. I don't consider the issue of communication to be connected to not having enough staff or having to add more staff. I think it was just a function of an administration that was having a very difficult time getting its footing. It's not, it has not been an easy transition. We know that. I believe that during this pandemic, we have all forced a much more robust logistic sort of approach to how we work together. And I think this council has been very proactive in that. So I do not believe, nor would I ever support the notion that in order for us to have a seamless communication and a seamless, productive working relationship between the two branches, that the only way we can achieve that is by adding more positions. Having been through the last administration and realizing how strategically and creatively the previous administration made sure that we had a seamless communication, I know that it can be possible. And so I believe more than any time, of course, because of the pandemic, we should not be adding positions. But even if we didn't have the pandemic, to be quite frank, I never felt comfortable with this notion that we needed to somehow add. I think that it is very possible if folks, get together and devise the strategy for us to continue to have robust communication and for us to have collaboration. So that continues to be my position, but I really wanted to clarify that because if you look at it, I believe that actually we have been able to designate through these ACAOs more capacity for the executive to have portfolio-driven folks, and I think that there should be plenty now of positions to work with the 9 of us. So just want to clarify that.
I was actually acknowledging what you said because you said it so well last week. I was just acknowledging. You did acknowledge that a part of one ACAO, but many other ACAOs and others were involved. I was just acknowledging because you explained it so well.
I appreciate that.
That I was really acknowledging that. Today I was just trying to emphasize there is that piece of it, which anytime you could call or you just explain how you call these different individuals. And all I'm trying to say is even logistically having, and I'm not going to go into it, but I'm just clarifying. I was acknowledging what you were saying.
I appreciate that.
I understand and agree with you. You're absolutely right. You should be able to do that. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Albernaz.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as I said during our last discussion, I appreciate the efforts of the administration in acknowledging that there has been a communication challenge and respect their interest in addressing it. But for the reasons we stated last time, I just don't think it's the appropriate time to do that in this way right now. And it feels like that would be another cook in the kitchen. And I think there's an opportunity within the existing structure of staffing for us to improve communication. And I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, and I know my colleagues in other committees have done the same thing, but we are having, up until we were discussing the budget, weekly discussions and briefings from the Department of Health and Human Services, and Ms. Sturgis joined those phone calls, and I found it to be very valuable to have somebody from the second floor within those discussions, and she was able to more proactively address some of the issues that we were talking about at the department level and connect it back to the second floor. And I think that has resulted in some greater efficiencies. And that's just one small example, but I think there are more moving forward in which we can create a structure of discussion and communication around specific issues that is a little bit more seamless than what we have right now. And so, and you also have folks on the second floor who've been around longer and have their bearings more straight than they did maybe 6 or 8 months ago. And I think that will be a benefit as well. And with regards to hanging onto the position by not funding it, I respect that, but But it's not really much different than us coming back at some future date, and if the county executive would like to see this move forward, as we have with positions with labor relations, as we have with other positions that have been presented by the county executive, we can revisit it at that time. And so it's a tool I'm very familiar with, hanging onto a position within the department, but not funding it. But I think in this instance, you're hearing from council an interest in exploring this later. And I think that's a sincere and authentic interest. And so I don't know that it's necessary to keep the staff position on the rolls. I think we're going to have this discussion at some point later on anyways. And the mechanism that we use is really not that different between, presenting the position formally all over again versus restating it through the other process. So I support the amendment, and I know that we're going to revisit this, as we are so many other issues. But I think that's a smart way to go right now, and do acknowledge the effort, especially over the last month, to improve on some of those communication issues.
Thank you. I just think I wanted to be clear on mine. I actually am somewhere between what Councilmember Jawando has said and what Councilmember Almanaz has said. I believe that we do need better communication between the county executive and the county council. I think that is, to me, has been crystal clear for a while. And I think we need to do that. And if it means to provide for the unfunded positions so that we can at some point have the discussion later so that we can figure out what's the better way to communicate, I'm fine to do that. I'm also fine to consider what Councilmember Albarnaz just said. Basically, it's the same thing, except that we would be discussing it later on rather than doing an unfunded position right now. So I have some great question of how we should do this together. I do believe that if we want better communication from the county executive side to the county council side, we need to give the county executive some flexibility on how to do that. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. I think we have given, as the chair of the Government Operations Committee noted, significant flexibility with a tremendous number of new positions and reorganization that we fulfilled in warp speed last year at the interest of the county executive. There were some of us who actually said that we should slow things down and request a more formal and more well-formulated plan of exactly how these positions were going to work, but out of deference to the county executive to provide that level of flexibility, that was provided. And I think that level of deference has occurred, but we're 18 months in, and now it's time not to look at adding new positions, but figuring out how to make things work. And I really do not believe this is a resource issue. This is a leadership issue. And I hope that the county executive is committed to the communication as he is to the position, that he is looking to help facilitate that communication. Clearly there's a problem, but this is not the appropriate solution. And last year, some of the reorganization, we did something similar, where the proposal was to take completely unrelated positions and move them into new offices and move them into new roles, and explaining them to the public and explaining them during work sessions was extremely difficult and extremely challenging and not particularly transparent. The easiest, cleanest, and best thing to do is for us to move forward to simply address the fact that the executive branch has identified a position that's not necessary, and to untangle the requirement that the CJCC be staffed by this particular position, which is no longer needed, and to allow for the flexibility, which is what this bill as amended by Councilmember Navarro at the suggestion of staff would do, would allow the county executive, based on his prerogative, and the CAO, based on his prerogative, to assign the appropriate person to staff these responsibilities. If there is an interest of creating new positions, I'd hope that they'd be offset by eliminating positions. We still are waiting for the first indication of the reorganization and restructuring that we have been told. Here was the first time a position was identified that wasn't necessary, and rather than eliminating it, which would be the first step, a down payment on that commitment, it's being attempted to be repurposed. So I hope that we can move forward in this, adopt the bill as amended per the suggestion of staff and based on the motion made by Councilmember Navarro. And then if there are ways of additional reorganizations and restructuring, I hope that it will come as part of a larger effort that doesn't just add new positions or keep positions that aren't necessary in county government, but actually is part of real, serious, and significant savings that actually address the efficiencies that we have to find and that the public has been promised in order to maintain county services at a cost that we can actually afford.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Ms. Kasiri. Who's performing the work now for the CJCC?
Carolyn and Stewart are one of the ACAOs.
So the legislation now just allows this work to be performed by another designee. It's already being performed by another designee.
Yes.
I'm ambivalent here. It's not necessary to act on the legislation. I think we could just simply remove it. I don't know if procedurally how you do that at this point. Might need a motion, but I'm happy to vote. I support the staff amendment, but as a practical matter, it doesn't sound as though it's needed either. We could simply allow the status quo to persist, and it would be the same, and that would be fine. But I guess if the council president wants to recommend that we not act on this bill and just leave it and come back to it another day or not, I'm fine with that as well.
Thank you.
Or I'm happy to vote for I support the staff amendment, but I'm also willing to just simply table it or just not have it.
Thank you. Councilmember Giwando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually that was going to be my motion, that we just would table the amendment and then table the bill. Just so we have that flexibility in light of the conversation that's already being considered. Ms. Sturgis is already fulfilling the responsibility. That way it's not fully off the table. We can come back to it. The position is not created today, but we can revisit the bill if we need to. So that would be my motion to table the amendment.
Is there a second? Council Vice President Hucker?
Excuse me, you have a motion. It needs to. Are you trying to amend the motion or?
The motion that Councilmember Giwando just made, are you saying I don't need a second for his motion?
No. We have to dispense with the first motion.
Well, that's what I was trying to do, was dispense with the first motion. Maybe I used the Robert's rules.
Well, if you're trying to table it, I guess
my understanding is
that table the bill,
right?
Then I guess if you have 5 votes to do that, then there's no debate and it's over and it goes away.
But for a table, I do need a second on that. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, you do.
So, and Council Vice President Hucker, you did second it. Is that correct? Yes. So it's been moved by Councilmember Giwando, seconded by Council Vice President Hucker, that we table this action, this expedited bill. All those in favor? All those in favor?
Can we just discuss?
Go ahead.
You can't discuss the motion to table, actually.
Well, but can I have a point of clarification not to discuss the motion? From a procedural standpoint, can the motion to table the bill while there's an active motion on the floor? There's an amendment and an active motion on the floor.
That is what we can do, but that's a good question. Mr. Drummer.
Yeah, I believe if there's 5 votes, you can move to table it. Unfortunately, I didn't bring my Robert's Rules of Order with me.
From what I remember last time when I made a mess of this whole thing, it is what we can do, and there's no debate.
There's no debate.
You got it correct, Mr. President. It's a tabling motion supersedes all other motions. It needs to be dispensed of before you can go to any other business.
So, based on that, it was moved by Councilmember Giwando, seconded by Vice President Hucker, that we table this motion? All those in favor of tabling the motion, please raise your hand. So that is Councilmember Glass, Councilmember Reamer, Councilmember Hucker, Councilmember Giundo, and Councilmember Katz. So that is 5 votes to table. All those opposed to tabling it, please raise your hand. That is Councilmember Albornoz, Friedson, Navarro, and Rice. So this motion is tabled 5-4. Thank you very much. Next item, Mr. Drummer, I get to move on, right? Just correct me if I'm wrong here.
Move on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Drummer. Next item that we have is item number 4, and it's an action item, and it's a resolution to adopt Executive Regulation 2519, amendments to the personnel regulations, and it's Councilmember Navarro, please.
Yes, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Drummer to explain that this is connected to previous vote.
Okay, this regulation goes along with the bill that you approved earlier today, the Office of Labor Relations, Bill 1920. What the regulation does is make amendments to the personnel regulations to recognize that there is an Office of Labor Relations, and wherever the personnel regulations refer to duties of the the Office of Human Resources that were previously that deal with labor relations, it moves it to the Office of Labor Relations. So it goes along with the bill. Since you did the bill, I would certainly recommend you do this. Otherwise, we have a conflict between the personnel regulations and the code.
Thank you. Why would that get in our way? I see no speakers on this. Is there a motion? Councilmember Navarro? It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item that we have, the last item that we have for this morning, is action item on FY 21-26 through 26 capital improvements CIP, revised reconciliation changes to FY 21, and either or both Mr. Levchenko or Dr. Orlin will be discussing that with us, please.
Good morning, council members. The staff report before you sort of walks through what the council still needs to do, and I'll just briefly go through that. On May 14th, the council preliminarily approved its CIP reconciliation to balance FYs 21 to 26. However, a couple days later, in working with the Office of Management and Budget, OMB identified an error in staff's report in the reconciliation. It had to do with the recordation tax write-down that we did talk about. And I've got the numbers on the first page of the cover sheet showing that issue. Basically, we recognized the write-down but didn't make the appropriate adjustment on the bond side. So we have we understated the gap with regard to the recordation tax write-down. The numbers for FY 22 through 26 are manageable with our existing reconciliation. However, FY 21 does need to be revisited to cover that understated gap of just under $20 million. In response to that, staff worked on a FY 21 reconciliation, if you will, to solve the FY 21 issue without reopening the FY 22 through 26, which the council had already straw vote approved last Thursday. So staff identified a number of projects, and just sort of the philosophy behind this, the intent was, as I mentioned, to address FY 21, to not impact the other years. So we were looking at one-time cuts in projects. This is somewhat akin to the PAYGO exercise that the council discussed last week as well. And so that was the first place staff looked for potential projects. And the best projects to accommodate this in this way are level of effort projects throughout county government and the different agencies. So staff identified a list of these projects, and suggested one-time cuts in FY21 to accommodate this gap in FY21. And we provided that in the packet. You'll see on page 2 of this packet, we have a list of projects within county government, public schools, and Montgomery Parks that, with adjustments from the reconciliation from last week, that if all taken would add up to $20 million. In addition, staff identified some additional projects that could be taken or alternatively taken if any of these were not desired by the council. Now, subsequent to this packet going out, we did hear back from Parks and from DOT with some potential substitute options that would still achieve the same savings, but would do them in a slightly different way in those categories. And staff then put out an addendum packet late yesterday that revised this chart that was on the original packet and shows those new changes, because staff was comfortable with those changes because they one were the same dollar amounts in FY21 and in the same general categories as well. So staff felt that was certainly within the spirit of what staff was trying to do anyway, and it had the benefit of having the preference of the departments affected. So the addendum packet now shows a revised chart, and the revised projects are italics and bolded, so you can see those. But it still adds up to the $20 million. We still have the second chart showing how you would get additional savings if you were not to take all the savings on the first chart. So we have both those charts available. At this point, I'll ask for the council president's preference whether you want us to read through each of these changes or discuss them based on any questions council members have. In the interest of time, I wasn't sure which way you wanted to handle that, Mr. President.
Well, thank you. But first off, does Dr. Orland have anything to add?
Sure. Can you hear me?
All right, we can.
Okay. For some reason, my video went off. In any event, we also heard in the last hour, council members got copied on this as well, from Montgomery College. There were a couple of alternative cuts that we had suggested on page 3 in the college, should you want to use those instead of part of what's on page 2. And they have come back with a revision to that, just as DOT and Parks has on the page 2 cuts. So if you wanted to not do any of the ones on page 2 and you wanted to replace it with a cut from the college is now suggesting, instead of cutting Capital Renewal College and PLAR, which a total of $1 million between the two, they suggest a cut of site improvements of $700,000, elevator modernization of $200,000, and roof replacement of $100,000. That adds up to the $1 million. And as Keith was saying about DOT and Parks, it fits within the spirit of what we were trying to come up with. And again, the college reductions, Mr. Lubchenko and I are not recommending, but they're there as alternatives should you not want to cut something on that initial $20 million list. I hope I made that clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lubchenko, to your question, I think what I'm going to do is ask for questions of the council, and then if we need to go back through and give more information, we will do that. But I think that we can start with that, and we're going to start with Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And I think I'll start with the easiest one first. When it comes to Montgomery College's reductions, those, and like Dr. Orland said, were optional based on as a placeholder in case we wanted to do something else. I would hope that we would not move these $1 million in reductions. Remember, we were very strategic as a council in terms of keeping projects afloat when it came to PLAR and other roof replacements. So we were very strategic about how we did that, and that would up in the apple cart. Now, certainly Montgomery College just then came up with other recommendations to alleviate that, so that we could keep that strategy in place. Nonetheless, I would recommend us diving in. The college was very lean in terms of its recommendations. When it came to Montgomery County Public Schools, both you, Councilmember Katz, and myself, Mr. President, have spent a lot of time and represent the greater surrounding area of Southlake Elementary School. We certainly understand the concerns and challenges that this school faces, not only from a very challenging physical structure, but also some of the challenges inside the classrooms. Understanding that this is one of the schools with the highest free and reduced meals rates, as well as highest number of students who have English as a second language. It really is something where we need to make sure that we're delivering for those students. And while we were able to keep Neilsville Middle School, that also has very similar things on track, unfortunately, just based on timing and where the project fell in terms of expenditures, Southlake Elementary School was temporarily pushed out of the CIP in terms of keeping it on schedule. I will say this, our commitment to Southlake remains strong. We know that this is a priority, not only for us, but I've talked directly to our superintendent of public schools, who also has reiterated that this is an incredibly important project moving forward. And so what I've proposed, Mr. President, is for the Education and Culture Committee to come back in August or September to understand what the puts and takes are of the current CIP budget. It is quite understandable that based on this global pandemic, there will be projects that will not be able to move forward just based on feasibility. We do not yet know what those projects are. There will also be cost savings associated with some projects as construction costs have already started to go down. And there may be adjustments that will be made that will allow us to keep our priorities in place. The key in this whole thing is I don't want to go into a discussion about pitting one school against another, pushing one out for another one. That's not what this is about. This is about us making sure that we prioritize all the things that we know are incredibly important to this council and to this greater community. And I really appreciate folks who are don't even represent the area, who understand just how important this is, which is all 8 of my colleagues. And so I really want to thank you for all of your continued conversations with me and with the community about supporting this ever important project. And so my promise, and I want to make sure it's very clear, this is recorded. My promise is we will come back to this. I've already talked to the president of the Board of Education as well as the superintendent of public schools. Everyone is in agreement. We are coming back to this. We are going to discuss this in greater detail and figure out a way to make sure that our priorities continue to be the priorities that we know have to move forward. And so I can't say more than that, Mr. President, but did want to make sure that all of you understand where I stand as the chair of the Education and Culture Committee, what I think is the best strategy for us moving forward, and look forward to working with our greater community, the Southlake community, our members of the Board of Education and our superintendent, and each and every one of you to move those forward accordingly. So thank you.
Thank you, and well said, and thank you for all of your hard work on this, Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments from the Education Committee Chair, and I heard during our discussion on the full CIP, expressed a similar observation about the need to come back in the fall and take another look, and I think that makes some sense. I think we're all concerned about the elementary schools and the projects in the major capital projects category. So we'll see what happens with slippage and various things. I did want to just note, but I just want to be clear though. So there isn't a change recommended to what the staff had proposed. Is that correct? Yeah. There is one I'm sure the chair will get to for the college. Park and Planning, we had conversation with them over the weekend. So they had some changes to how they would prefer to absorb the cut. Mr. Friedson may get into that as well. But this is not fun. There's a lot of stuff in this FY21 list that I know certainly there were some items here that I was really excited about. I believe in the economic development category, the county government projects. That's a expansion of the bio wet lab facility in Montgomery College in Germantown, which was really exciting. So hopefully we can put that back next year. This is what we are expecting. We're heading into very difficult fiscal environment. Revenues are declining, and there's going to be more of this in the coming months. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the comments from the Education and Culture Committee chair of thoughtfulness about how we go about conversations and making these tough decisions. Particularly, I know there's a lot of interest in the last 24 hours regarding Southlake Elementary School, and while it is in the Education and Culture Committee's district, it is across the street from Mr. Katz's, the council president's district as well. So there is a lot of interest from everybody, of course. And not wanting to pit any schools against each other, but for me, as I said last week when we all had the opportunity to speak about this in more in depth, equity is important to me, and I do appreciate the proposal to continue this conversation and to see what is possible, because ultimately that's what we're here for. And as Mr. Reamer just noted, our tough budget conversations are going to continue, and this is the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately, given all the budget projections and revenue shortfalls that are likely to be before us. And so it is, I lament the fact that we will probably have to have these conversations more in the coming weeks and months, but those present opportunities for us to apply a different lens. One, I hope, prioritizes equity as we go through these budget conversations. But again, I do appreciate the thoughtfulness between council and particularly MCPS to do right by all of our students throughout the county and recognizing the varying needs that do exist. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to our fearless leader, Councilmember Rice, and the Education and Culture Committee for stating it so well. And I think we're going to take it up even before the fall. So as far as the coming back is in potentially in August in the summer. So, Councilmember Glass hit my nail on the head as far as all of us feel equity. Those of us have been to Southlake. We know the need. We know how, and we've seen it. And everyone, including the superintendent, the Board of Education, I think wants to just have the full information, see about construction costs so that we can hopefully quickly come back and make sure that gets in. Obviously, there's a ton of need. It was a tough decision to make. The high schools were critically important. And so I really appreciate the chair's work as a coalition with all of us to, as well as the superintendent and the Board of Education and the community who organized in a way across the county that has been very impressive and is indicative of the need and the advocacy for the students. And as my elementary students talk in the background, I will stop there. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yes, thank you. A lot of what should have been said has been said. So I just quickly wanted to say, we're here to talk about cuts, additional cuts. I think that, I'm glad that we were able to identify them. It was a good collaboration between Office of Management Budget and our council staff. But this isn't about adding new funding or picking additional projects. It's about finding an additional $20 million in cuts for next year and making further difficult choices on top of the tough choices that we've already had to make given the significant fiscal constraints that we face. And I think that we've struck a decent balance and one that I think we should be proud of, but recognizing that we have lots of things that we wish we could have done and lots of projects that we wish we could have funded in the initial conversation based on the CIP that we had the straw vote on last week. And based on these additional cuts. I am pleased that given these additional cuts, we did provide an opportunity for some of the impacted organizations to determine which cuts would be least harmful to priorities and make sure that they had the least impact on residents. In particular, the Parks Department, I think, put forward a package that would have less of an impact in terms of moving forward on the real needs, including making sure that we maintain the commitment to the Trails Network, which has demonstrated its significance. This would have added a significant additional cut, and we're seeing upwards of 40% increase in the usage of trails. And so I think the alternative, while we stayed at the same cut for the parks, this was one that was done in a way that was more focused on the priorities, both that the council partook in our deliberations and that the Parks Department has. So I appreciate the fact that the Parks Department and council staff and several council members were able to step in to make sure that these cuts, while difficult, have the least amount of impact as possible, and look forward to the tough decisions that we're going to have to make and the challenges that we're going to have to continue to face, because the fiscal constraints that we have are not going to get better, they're going to get worse. And this puts us in a position to be able to weather the storm as best as we can while protecting the priorities that we all have and that we all share, recognizing that there are many projects that we wish we could have funded, that we wish we could have done, and that we will continue to work on as we get through this budget and move forward into the future.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, not the kind of situation any of us would want to find ourselves. This, again, is another attempt at trying to make sure that we are cautious and recognizing that our, debt, the debt service is such that we have to continue to be careful. And so looking at these, looking at the list, none of this items, none of them are items that I would have wanted to support. But I understand what we're dealing with and understand the relationship between our debt service and also how it crowds out areas of our operating budget, which at this particular time, more than ever, we have to be mindful because there is just so much uncertainty. So I really appreciate Councilmember Rice's comments. I agree with him in terms of Montgomery College. I agree with him in terms of Southlake. I will only caution us when I hear the word equity mentioned. The reality is that we have so many schools that can make that case, and so we're trying to do everything we can to address as many of them as possible. But the reality, and I think it's important to recognize that, is that our county has many, many schools that are affected, that need to be addressed, and that have similar, demographic characteristics. And so we're doing everything possible to address that within these very tight resources. So again, I'm not happy to have to come back to this because we deliberated and I felt we had found a great balance, but here we are having to address another 20 million, but to agree and hope that we will support this particular chart. I know Montgomery College has communicated via Mr. Howard that there are some other things that they would consider if we were not to adopt this one, but I think this is balanced and I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albernaud.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Dr. Orland and Keith for turning around so quickly these adjustments, and appreciate all the efforts of everyone to seamlessly, in a record amount of time, address the $20 million shortfall that was identified over the weekend. And very much associate myself with all the comments of my colleagues regarding just how difficult and painful this process has been, and an acknowledgement that it will likely be even more painful moving forward. And we will continue to do as we have done, which is do our best to hold the line and address the needs as holistically and strategically as humanly possible. And I can't thank Chairman Rice enough for the acknowledgement of the need to revisit some specific projects in particular, given all of the very well-stated reasoning for the school system making them a priority in the first place. And so it will be an appropriate thing for us to come back and talk about this as we are with so many other issues as the picture becomes more clear. And I also want to state that this council has taken pretty remarkable efforts to address the needs of families in crisis right now. Many of the families that are students and go to these schools, and we will continue to do that because we know that what lies ahead is perilous. And so while we work on a parallel track to address the long-term capital needs of these buildings, we want to address the needs of the families that are struggling financially, that are struggling with food security, that are struggling with, socially and emotionally, and that we know are going to struggle academically as people come back to school. And so we stand ready, as we always will and always do, to support and stand up these families as well. So thank you, Mr. President, and I look forward to revisiting this issue in the near future.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. Just wanted to expand on a couple of points mentioned by Andrew, our parks lead. So the trails issue is really interesting. You know, we have suddenly found a growing interest in trails, and I'm optimistic that it's going to stay. You know, that people will they will be finding a new way to spend time that they enjoy, and they're going to look to keep that up. And the same goes for biking, frankly. I understand that nationally, you know, it's hard to get a bike now. Suddenly people are you know, seeking that option because of concerns about other modes of transportation. So I'm really pleased that we are able, through this action, to preserve the funding that we added for trails by taking it from other places where parks can squeeze the budget a bit. And that's much appreciated. And I did want to mention on the athletic fields issue, you know, it definitely hurts not to add more funding into athletic fields. I think that's something we all wanted to do. We did add a little through the CUP program on school sites, you know, last week. But there's a couple of really high priority projects that I just really hope we can keep on track. One of them is a Little League field with lights in Wheaton. Believe it or not, Montgomery County, with 1,000,001 people, we have 2 Little League fields with mounds in the entire county, and only one of them has lights outside the city of Gaithersburg. So that's just a real problem, and it's something we got to fix. So Parks is trying to fix that. They have an idea for how to bring back a Little League field to restore it to its original design in Wheaton, and then also Eastern Middle School. When we created the Hillendale Park, we removed 2 Little League softball diamonds in Hillendale to replace them with a loop trail, and we need to add 2 softball diamonds. So Parks has an idea about renovating Eastern's fields and bringing them into the permit program and making them high quality fields. And that would also fill a big gap in the East County, Lower East County. Got a lot more work to do in Lower East County, but I just want to mention that because in the dialogue with Parks, you know, they felt like it was possible to keep those 2 on track. So I wanted to just highlight that today because it's an important part of my consideration as I vote for this revised package. Thanks.
Thank you, Vice President Hucker.
I agree with Councilmember Reamer about the need to focus on Lower East County. Thank you to the chair of the ENC committee and to Keith and Glenn for all their work on this. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think everything has been said. None of us want to be in this position, and it's really unfortunate to have to cut Pilar and HVAC given how acute that need is and has been for a long time. But I'm glad we're going to be able to turn back to it in the fall. Eastern Middle School ought to be on the list for that, as well as the discussion of the playing fields. I think it's certainly better to take this approach. It's more equitable than to delay individual school projects that have already been delayed. And I appreciate the approach of letting the departments in the college suggest their own cuts. So again, thank you for all the work on this. none of us want to be here, but I support the proposal.
Thank you. Before I ask for a motion, Mr. Levchenko or Dr. Orland, did you have anything else to add?
Just want to make sure what you're voting on is the $20 million worth of reductions that's in the addendum. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Levchenko? You're on mute.
Just to make sure that, as Dr. Orland mentioned, it's the addendum chart, and it's the chart that adds up to the $20 million. The second chart in the addendum, once again, were additional cuts only if you did not cut the entire list on the first chart. So just to be clear, what is being voted on today?
Thank you. Is there a motion? Councilmember Rice. Did you? Yes.
So, Mr. President, what I'd like to do is move the amended staff recommendations that include what Parks did as a substitute and all of the rest of the recommendations that staff made, adding up to the $20 million in reductions.
Okay, it's been moved by Councilmember Rice.
Could I add, yes. It's not just Parks, but also DOT.
I'm sorry, and DOT. Thank you. Amended motion.
No, the college changes are not on the list.
That was an option. So the college isn't added in. They're not being cut.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, it was moved by Councilmember Rice.
I'm sorry, I think I missed something along the way. So the motion is not to save the funding in the college, is that right?
No, the college isn't taking any reductions. The college was just a proposed option of a reduction if we needed to replace reductions that were already there with something else. So the college reductions are off the table entirely.
We're not in the recommendation.
So
that's correct.
Chart 1 with the additional amendments for the Parks and DOT, correct?
Yes, that's correct, Councilmember Navarro. Thank you.
Okay, it was moved by Councilmember Rice. We're looking for a second. Seconded by Councilmember Friesen. I felt like I needed Councilmember Rice. I got as an auctioneer over here. I got 20 minutes. It's moved by Councilmember Rice, seconded by Councilmember Friesen. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Well, with that, we are actually adjourned unless we have any special meetings, which you always watch this space. Unless we have any special meetings, we won't have another meeting until all the way till Thursday. Thank you all very much for being here. We are adjourned.
We'll miss you.